Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the Spring is Here edition. I'm John Bonus, and Trish Daly with me here in Gleeman and the Geek.
I'm here.
And so is Spring, Aaron Gleeman.
Yeah, but
just in time for Twins
come
baseball.
on. Who's the headliner? Me or Spring?
Spring.
You see Spring every year.
Let me be very clear.
No, but you've seen Spring every year of your life, which is, as we've established, 84 years old.
Yeah.
And you've only known me for like 20, so.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what I'm going with this. You know, sometimes you try something at the beginning of a show, you realize there's nothing to it. You throw it out, you go, you move on.
I choose still Spring.
Yeah. No, I know. There's no comedy to be squeezed from this bit. Nope. Sometimes that's all there is. I don't know. Look, it's a lot of shows, and John just opens the same way every show, and I got to think of something to say.
That's it.
We are here. It is... What day is today?
Monday morning.
Monday morning. Thank God. There's yet
it's a little weird because we've had so many day games. So often in April we've got day games and such. It does mess you up a little bit as to which day it is.
Three consecutive day games. Today will be the fourth consecutive day game. There's finally one night game tomorrow, but then there's another
on Dollar Dog Day. I will be there for Dollar Dog.
Okay. You know, in the press box, every day is $1.50 dog.
Yeah,
day.
I know.
Now they're not the good hot dogs.
Well, they're not the good hot dogs for Dollar Dog Day.
Oh, really?
Either. No. Yeah.
Bring back the Dome Dog. I used to love those. Our hot dogs in the press box have just been on that roller for decades, since the Garden Hire era, basically. But they're only $1.50. So.
Halsey Hall.
Yeah.
It was the last one to have one of those hot dogs.
Slap some ketchup and mustard on that thing and just hope it doesn't kill you. But, yeah, the day games are weird. From the perspective of covering it, it's weird because you're just waking up and heading over there, it feels like.
Right.
And we've been kind of jamming in these podcasts in the morning. Like I head from here over there for Clubhouse access in like an hour and a half. But
we should mention the last time when we jammed in the morning was a Patreon. We did a full hour and a half on the 2.5 hour home opener. We will probably be touching a little bit on the home opener as part of this overall series. But if you want a deeper dive into that, head over to Patreon.com.
Yeah, join the Patreon.
This is going to be a good year to be on Patreon.
Yeah, as opposed to those last several years where it was just garbage. But this year we're going to be good. No, but also I think the day game, I've talked to a couple players about this actually yesterday, and even Baldelli talked about it a little. I know people don't like to hear about shadows and cold temperatures favoring pitchers and all that stuff, but there is a sort of, can we get a night game here feeling, I think, among this team. Because even a lot of the road games that they've played so far were on the openers.
Well, there's a cadence to the baseball season that everybody kind of falls into. And that cadence mostly involves night games, right? I mean, most players who have played for a long period of time, whether it's in the minors or the majors or whatever, are used to night games. So the way it works is, you've got your daily schedule, and everybody's kind of waiting for that to actually kick into gear.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing with beat reporters, to be honest with you.
Just no one cares about art. But I also think there's just a physical component of it. It's just like, it's just different playing in the afternoon constantly. The weather's different. The sun is different. When you start a game at 3, which tends to be opening day, including here, the home opener. Yep. 5:15 rolls around, and the plate is covered by a shadow.
Right.
And we saw Martin Maldonado, who's a Gold Glove caliber catcher.
Right.
He's literally only in the majors because he's a great catcher, because he sure as hell can't hit.
Right.
He's
proved that.
Had trouble just catching high fastballs because he couldn't see the ball.
Right.
And a couple players talked about that in some of these sort of twilight situations. And it's like, well, you look at the numbers, and it's like, well, the power hasn't really been consistent from the Twins. Their pitching has been really good, but there's like, well, these are kind of tied together. I mean, there's the cold weather, there's the shadows, there's these sort of, wake up and go to the ballpark, here we go.
Kyle Farmer said his game when he hit, he couldn't even really see where it went, right?
The one, the bases loaded up the middle, the kind of 18 hopper up the middle, that was the walk-off in the 10th inning against the Astros early in the series. And then afterward, he said, well, I knew I hit it up the middle, but I went to look where it was, and it was completely covered by shadows, and I just thought, well, I'll just run to first either way, I guess. What's the worst that can happen? It's a weird situation. I think it often happens, early in the season, especially if you start on the road. That tends to mean you're going to have multiple opening day scenarios.
Right.
Like you're going to have one or two road openers for those teams, which are often at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock.
Right.
And then you're going to come back home and have it. So I don't know. I
think there might also be something to the fact that, early in the season and late in the season, the sun angle's just a little bit different than it is the rest of the year. Like the sun is still kind of low in the sky here. And I think that plays with the shadows a little bit more in, early April and late September than it does, during June or July for day games.
And for beat writers, it's much harder to get
for beat writers. It's the sun is the danger.
Plastered
July
at night, and then show up at 9:45 the next morning, and that's a key consideration for many of our local and national beat writers. But the Twins took 2 out of 3 from the defending champs, and I don't think the Astros are quite firing on all cylinders at the moment. Altuve's out.
Absolutely.
Michael Brantley's out. They lost Justin Verlander, obviously, this offseason to free agency. But, this lineup is still 4 or 5 deep in All-Stars.
I think we both picked them for the over at 94.5 or something 95.5.
I think I've picked them for the over every year for the past 8 years.
Their over number was insanely high. I remember that because I almost didn't choose them because it was just that high.
I wouldn't take that, but I would take 92 now as the over. But also the Twins have not – they went 0-6 against the Astros last season. And in 2020, they were swept out of the playoffs at home by the Astros. That was only 2 games. Yeah. And then even going back prior to that –
2019, I remember, was a disaster.
Some good – some otherwise very good Twins teams got just absolutely spanked by the Astros. If the series you're thinking of is the one I'm thinking of.
I think
it was here – and it was 27-3 or something like that in 3 games or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Last year, they got outscored 21-3.
Okay.
At home.
Yeah.
In May versus the Astros. Right. Because it hasn't just been that they have been swept. It's that the games were not even close
that's what
to competitive.
The Astros do to people. It's you lose to them, yes, they're going to win 100 games every year, but they, when it starts to go bad for teams against the Astros, you don't lose 3-1. You lose 11-1.
I remember last year the Dodgers and the Astros just came in and just asserted dominance immediately, right? And it was nice to see. And when we took a look at this series, when I took a look at this series, I should say, before the season began, I said, well, the Twins don't face their first real test until their 4th series.
Yeah, because they're too good to be a test.
That's right. Kansas City's not going to be a test. Miami's not going to be a test. Right. Houston's not going to be a test. They're too good to begin with.
It's like if you had a kid and you're they're in the whatever grades learned in multiplication tables. What's that? 4th grade, 5th grade or something like that? Earlier? Later?
2nd grade.
Okay. Well, that says a lot about me.
Maybe 3rd grade? I don't know.
You're speaking to 1994 state champion from Math Masters in Minnesota. So I learned those multiplication. But my point is, that was just an opportunity to brag about something I won 30 years ago.
Tell us about your Jewish League basketball career, too.
Well, that was several years later, John. And then after that, I dropped out of college. So you see how things go. But my point is, these opening series were if you had a 8-year-old and you're teaching them the multiplication tables, and then the Astros come into town is advanced calculus, and you're that is a test in the sense that they're not going to be able to do it,
right?
But to your point, it's not really a test because what does that prove about an 8-year-old?
Right, yeah.
Well, what we kind of saw is the 8-year-old at least
got the idea of slope and differentials and integration.
I couldn't even think of a thing in there. I was like, what's a term from that? I don't know. I didn't even get that far in college. But yeah, it's obviously a good sign. The Astros are a little bit more vulnerable now than they have been and may be, which is good. The Twins play them again pretty quickly here, I think before the end of May, and then they're just done with them.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Yankees. They have a series now. So now, as of 4 hours from now,
I was going to say they faced two of the probably the 2 toughest teams real early in the American League, but I'm not sure that either of those 2 are the toughest team right now in the American League, given what the Rays are doing.
Yeah, true. Although the Rays have played Oakland, Detroit, and someone else crappy.
Okay, all right.
Pittsburgh, maybe?
Yeah, but they beat them all by 4+ runs.
Yeah. But they're now welcoming the White Sox to town, and they're getting the White Sox top 3 starters including Dylan Cease in Game 1, who's a Cy Young caliber guy, Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito. And then right after that, they go to New York, which is a house of horrors always for the Twins. They're going to get Nestor Cortez, who was an All-Star last year, and then I think the last game of that series, it's a 4-game series against the Yankees, they're going to get Garrett Cole, who's a former Cy Young winner.
Right.
And then after that, they go to Boston. And I'm not saying Boston is a powerhouse now, but this is a tough 10-game stretch.
Yes, it is.
And particularly, I think they're going to see Chris Sale in Boston. I think the schedule lines up for. They're seeing a lot of real high-end pitching, starting with the 2 Miami guys, including the reigning Cy Young winner. Then you get to Houston, which always has high-end pitching, with or without Verlander, with or without Cole. They do it every year, even bullpen guys. And you're facing, 15-game stretch, 10 All-Star caliber starters, something like that, including some Cy Young winners, and you toss in the stuff we talked about with the weather and the early start times and stuff. It's not. I don't think it's like shocking that the lineup hasn't been horrible. I mean, they're not like dead last.
They are 12th out of 15th in the American League in runs.
It's just been similar to last year, real hit or miss. Like, they've had so many games where they scored 9 runs, including in this series,
right?
And then otherwise it's 1 or 2 runs, 0 runs, or whatever. They need some level of consistency towards 4 or 5 runs, particularly with this pitching staff. Now, the flip side of what I'm saying is their pitching staff probably is a little bit better than it actually has been. Looks a little bit better than it actually has been because of what we're saying. Although this Astros lineup, even without Altuve, I mean, we saw it's still Bregman and Alvarez and Jose Abreu, who they added this offseason. So I don't know. I think it's a test. Like you said, it's not that vital of a test because they're going to be done with the Astros a month from now.
Right.
And then if you play them again, that's good news because that means you're playing in the playoffs.
Right.
But so I do think that the White Sox are always a good test.
Yep.
It's also just a good rivalry. Me and Dan Hayes always fist fight the White Sox beat reporters too, right before Game 1.
Yeah, it's like Anchorman.
Yeah, it's just like that. Yep. Doe comes in with a trident. It's crazy to see.
That's killed a guy.
Yeah, I like this as a bit a lot. I'm trying to think if we could actually beat up the White Sox beat. It wouldn't be a real great fight, just in high caliber of fighting skills. But the White Sox are a test, and I think the Yankees are a test. The Yankees are going to be pretty good always,
right.
And I just think it's always a barometer of not how good the Twins are, but sort of like, is this a season worth kind of starting to dream on?
Investing in? Yeah,
because like if you
emotionally investing in?
Right. I'm not sitting here and saying they're going to win 3 out of 4 in Yankee Stadium.
Right.
But if they win 2 out of 4 or even 1 and have 3 competitive losses, you can at least come out of that and go, does that make the difference in this season? No. But it's at least you're saying, all right, weight class wise, we're probably in the right weight class at least.
That's right.
Now we have to work our way up the rankings.
Yeah.
But and that's kind of how I saw the Astros series. I thought, Baldelli said this after the game yesterday, which they lost, basically to Hunter Brown, who's a consensus top 50 prospect, really good young starting pitcher. And Baldelli said, today's game was not good. He clearly was not impressed with the caliber of at bats against Brown or the approach. But what he said in general was, I'm pretty pleased with how this series went overall. They didn't get the highest of high-end pitching performances the last 2 games. Both starters allowed 4 runs.
Right. But
it was essentially, Joe Ryan's was literally 1 pitch, the grand slam to Alvarez.
Yeah.
And then he
basically
pitched
an 8-pitch little meltdown.
Right. It was like a 2-minute meltdown, but it cost them 4 runs. And then Maui gave up kind of a cheap opposite field home run and a couple of CNI singles. But otherwise, both of them I thought pitched reasonably well. Like Ryan and Maui, they both went, I think, 6+ innings. If those are the bad starts out of the first 2 weeks of a season, you're in pretty good shape.
Especially versus the Astros.
Right.
6 innings with 4 runs versus the Astros. Nobody is disappointed by that.
Yeah, they have double-digit strikeouts.
And like you said, it felt to me in both situations like the Astros made the most of what they had. That they had that bases loaded situation, and got a fastball down the middle that he took advantage of, and by the way, it cleared the wall by 3 inches.
Oh, the homer?
The home run.
Slider.
No,
Alvarez.
I'm talking about Jordan.
That was
Alvarez.
a middle
fastball.
That was a terrible pitch to one of the 5 best hitters in the world.
Right, and it cleared the wall by like 3 seconds. Yes, just bounced off the top of that corner.
They almost avoided Joe Ryan. You're talking about. Almost avoided giving up a homer because he hit it too good.
Right.
It almost went through the wall, basically.
Yeah, that's right. I would have liked to see that bounce off that limestone, see if it cracks it or what. And then, the same thing happened yesterday, right? Malley, in general, felt pretty good about his slider all day. It's something that he's been working on. It's something he needs to work on. I wrote about this a little bit with Theo Tolleson on the game recap yesterday at Twins Daily. He had 2 problems last year. The big problem was his shoulder hurt, and he couldn't. But besides watching his velocity, it's important to watch how he does versus right-handers because he is a reverse splits guy. He has not done well versus right-handed hitters the last 2 years.
In recent years, yeah.
Yeah, the last 2 years. And that slider, he left one really bad slider, and it got taken out of there.
It was also, I think, just a fun series. I mean, obviously the wins were fun, but you got the Kyle Farmer walk-off winner in the 10th. Which is a very strange game just overall.
Right.
The Twins mustered a comeback and then just sort of let the Astros lose it in some ways, but took advantage and stayed in it, at least in a low-scoring game.
What, 2 wild pitches? 1 wild pitch, 1 pass ball,
just
something like that?
Very strange stuff going on in that game. Once the shadows started to come in, it got real weird.
Right.
And then obviously you have a little bit of an offensive explosion, which is pretty rare against Houston, where you have Farmer again. And then Buxton each hit, I think they both had 3-run homers.
Yeah.
And Buxton's was funny because Buxton's changed it from a close game to a not close game, which then caused John Duran to sit down in the bullpen. He had been warming up to come in for the save. You bring in Giovanni Moran, who then gives up damage, and then you got to have Duran come in
up again
to get 1 out.
Right.
And Doe counted
3 pitches.
From the time the bullpen door opened in left center to the time the catcher came out to shake his hand for the save, it was, I think, a minute, literally a minute. And so, or maybe from the time he was warming up. But I mean, it was, and I also thought it was funny that he started when he comes in. At that point, it was a save situation. I guess that was at the tying run. Yeah,
it was the tying run
at the plate.
Yeah.
And so,
that's why Moran he'd already given up 1 home run. Yeah.
It got serious all of a sudden, and it was very funny to me that it was against a rookie. I forget who it was batting, but Duran comes in, warms up. Everybody knows, they play his video on the screen. Everybody's all hyped up. The game all of a sudden is very tense because a game you thought you had won 10 minutes earlier is now, here we go again. And he starts him with the slow curveball, 87.
Right.
And the kid's like, okay. And then he throws him another one. And in my head, I'm thinking, throw him another one. Because I love the idea of Duran coming in and saying, it's not even worth using my fastball today. I'm not even going to show you the 103. But instead, he threw the fastball and finished the at-bat 1-2-3 like that. But obviously, that's a nice luxury to have, to just be able to, this is out of hand. This is silly. We're ending this now. I'm going to bring in the guy who's unhittable. But that type of stuff does add up over the course of 6 months, which is if you do that 5 times with Duran, it will affect his usage. Yes. For instance, yesterday it didn't come up because they were behind, but if the Twins had a 3-1 lead in the 8th inning yesterday, it's not 100% clear that Duran would have been available, or at least fully available with what he is. So
that's one of the things that, it's not surprising. We should hit a sponsor quick. Then let me make this point, and then we'll go to the sponsor.
Okay. You can try to make it.
It's not that surprising, or we can do it the other way around too. But it's not that surprising. But back into the bullpen did not do particularly well in this series.
Moran, that's why they're in the back end.
Well, that's exactly versus the Astros lineup. You'd expect the 5th, 6th, and 7th relievers to not have a very good game, but they in fact all had pretty crummy games.
Yeah. Moran is. I have a lot of faith in Moran. Just big picture, I think he's a odd skill set in that he's a lefty who's better against righties, and his best pitch is a changeup. Right. Although his fastball is not terrible, but I think the combination of he's not a traditional lefty in that I think they brought him in to face a couple of lefties in both of his appearances. 2 out of the next 3 are lefties, or 2 out of the next 4 are lefties, and that's fine. It's not.
Well, the Astros only had 2 lefties in their lineup, right?
So. But it's not like he should be avoiding lefties,
right?
But he's just not what you think of as like, ooh, I'll bring in the lefty to face a lefty. Right. So that's a weird aspect. It's not always the best matchup for him to bring him in to face predominantly lefties. And then also, if he falls behind in counts or starts walking people, which has been an issue for him, you lose, I think, for a guy who's a fastball changeup primarily, especially to right-handed hitters. He doesn't really throw slider to them. If you're behind in the count, it takes away a lot of the advantage you have because it simplifies the batter's mindset, or from like a game theory perspective. Because if you're up, 1-2 or 0-2, you can toy with them in terms of fastball changeup. Right. Like you can just throw 3 straight changeups if you want, and in their head they're thinking he's got to throw me a fastball at some, and you can completely screw with them. But if it's 3-1 or 2-1 constantly and you're behind, they can eliminate one of those pitches because they're not afraid to just take a strike. Right. And also you've not really proven over the course of your career that you can be an automatic strike when you need it. Right. And so we talked about this actually a couple weeks ago about changeups and stuff like that, but I think you saw this with Johan and Johan Santana, who's always my changeup example. The rare times he struggled with his command, it allowed opposing hitters to be like, I'll just sit on the changeup or I'll just sit on the fastball. And if he wants to just throw the other one for a strike, well, then we're just even in the count anyway. So I think that's going to be the challenge for Moran. Obviously, the eliminating walks is the real challenge. Right. But like the meta part of that is like, it's not so much the walks that kill him. It's, are you 3-1, 2-1 instead of 1-2, 0-2? Yeah, because I think he needs to be more in an attacking mindset, but also he needs to force the hitters to fear both pitches as opposed to being able to just kind of cross one out for a few.
It feels like it's a catch-22 both positively and negatively right from the beginning. That if he's got that control and therefore he can get ahead in the count, he becomes that much more dangerous. If he doesn't have that control and he gets behind in the count, he becomes that much more ineffective. Right. And so the start of the at-bat seems to be super important with him. So
I did not expect to have the first meaningful baseball topic on the show be Giovanni Moran, but here we are. Before we get into, we want to talk about the rotation and some Kepler and Wallner and Gallo and all that. We got a lot of little tidbits and updates and roster stuff.
It is spring, and we've got Forgotten Star Brewing opening up their patio.
We just hosted an event there.
Enormous event there. Yeah. And I'm actually a little disappointed to tell you that you guys missed another good time last night at Forgotten Star. I wasn't there for it, but it's Sunday Night Baseball. They have a special on Sunday Night Baseball. I think Forgotten Star's a pretty big baseball fan.
It's a baseball-friendly environment.
It is a baseball-friendly. In fact, I saw the event coordinator at the game on Saturday, actually. Yeah. So, yes. 6 to 9 on Sunday nights. Each week they'll be featuring a different $4 tap. One of their beers they put on special for $4 on Sunday nights for Sunday Night Baseball. So every Sunday you can come back and try something new. They'll change it around as to which one you have. They got the open garage doors, the summer breeze, crack of the wood bat, all of that. And they'll also have all Twins games this summer as well. Great place, great location. We had 350 people rave about how well they handled the big crowd that we had. A very cool facility. Everybody thinks
it's along the train tracks, East River Road and 49th. It's like, 12, 15 minutes from downtown Minneapolis, basically. Yes. Most nights you'll just find John there in general, but certainly when he's hosting an event. Forgotten Star Brewing, check him out. Tell him John sent you.
And also, speaking of spring, the quick spring has maybe made you think, oh shoot, I'm gonna have to do something about my lawn. And you're probably thinking, is it too late? No, it's not too late. Go and get Sunday at getsunday.com/Gleeman. You're going to be able to basically you put in your address. They show you a map, a satellite map of your yard.
Right. So they can know not only the dimensions of it in terms of what you'll need, but they know the type of soil, the type of grass, the environmental factors.
And maybe most importantly right now, given this quick spring, they know exactly when you should apply it.
Right.
Right. So they will ship it to you with instructions like you want to put this on these 3 days of the year. Right. And all you do is you hook up the bag to your hose and spray your lawn.
Yeah, super easy,
fertilized.
But it's customized for your exact lawn.
Right.
And if they're offering our listeners 20% off,
right,
full season plans start at just $109. And you can get 20% off when you visit getsunday.com/Gleeman20.
Oh, Gleeman 20.
For 20%.
Okay.
Sunday like the day, SUNDAY. So that's 20% off your custom lawn plan at getsunday.com/Gleeman20. Okay.
What a great week it's going to be.
Let's see. I got through all the. I don't know. That's enough probably on the Astros. Move forward. We're on to the next. You can't linger that much in these early games.
Okay.
It's like, do you even remember they played the Royals? I don't remember.
You drive. I'll be in the passenger. Let's go. Yeah.
You know I don't like to drive, John.
You're right. Yeah.
Have we talked about the fact that first of all, I never drive. Becky drives everywhere. The only place I ever drive with
is to here.
Well, no, but when I'm with her,
I see.
Is if we're going to see my family somewhere.
Really?
Because she gets too stressed out about that. So like if we're driving to Minnetonka or something to see my mom,
right,
I have to do that drive.
Okay,
so she can like get in the mindset of like but also I've now pushed it over to my partnership with Dan Hayes, which is he will often, we've talked about this with him on the air, it's ridiculous. He commutes basically from Chicago and has for 5 years now.
Yeah.
And he rents a place in the North Loop from another writer. Right. And sometimes he'll drive in from Chicago, right, in which case, he's on his own. But sometimes he'll fly in from Chicago if the flight's cheap enough, in which case after games, he'll be like, can I get a ride back to my place I'm staying at in North Loop from you if we're leaving at the same time? Right. And we now have it perfectly worked out. John is laughing because he's experienced this with me too. Like when we go to lunches, we start to walk to ramp A or whatever, and I flip him the keys to my car,
right?
And I have him drive himself to his place. Yeah, and everybody thinks that's always ridiculous, but like, who's a bigger expert on getting back to someone's own place than themselves? Right?
Sure.
Yeah. It probably looks confusing when we pull up. He gets out, goes in. I get out and get into the from the passenger to the main one. But
I like to drive, so
John always drive. I always make you drive. You've driven my car more than I have, probably. We go to lunch every time. John drives my car.
That's probably overstating it a little bit, but
it's close.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly driven it more when you're in the car.
Yeah.
I mean, right. When both of us are in the car, I should say.
Yes. Rarely has someone.
I don't think I've ever been in that car when you've driven.
Right. That's.
How about that?
Rarely has someone been a passenger in their own car more than me. So, I don't know. Do you want to talk about rotation stuff, or do you want to talk about the outfield situation?
Let's talk about rotation stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
They still, I believe, lead the AL in ERA and innings per start, like we talked about a minute ago. Even the least good starts they've had, which are the last couple days actually, have been 6 innings, 4 runs.
Right.
A lot of strikeouts, not many walks. They've gone 5+ innings, the starter, in each of the first 9 games of the season. And I was wondering, how often does that happen? The last time that happened for the Minnesota Twins, where the starting pitcher completed at least 5 innings in each of the first 9 games of a season, was 05. And here's the rotation in 05.
Oh, let me go.
Yeah.
Santana, Radke.
I'm not saying in order of, but go
Santana,
ahead.
Radke, Silva, Loge. 05. Mays was done by 05.
Mays was the 5th.
Was it? Okay.
At least to start the season. Now, it was different when they got late in the season. But that goes with what that's several times in the past couple months we've said, or I've said, and I've written this too, like this rotation on paper has a chance to be the Twins' best rotation since Johan Santana's prime. And that was basically Johan Santana's prime, and that was still before Radke kind of completely fell apart from an injury standpoint. It was the good aspect of Carlos Silva. You had the tail end of Kyle Loesch's Twins career. All that stuff sort of went together. Now, the 05 team was not a great team. I think they won like 83, 84 games, something like that. But
that was the gap year that they had.
That they didn't win because then in 06,
4 and 06,
they made the playoffs and lost to
the
Oakland.
A's.
Yeah. But I mean, I wrote about this a few days ago, but the whole narrative from last season of, they got quick hooks and they want to remove every starter and it's costing them games, and Baldelli has no feel for all that. What the Twins, I mean, that's on some aspect, their rotation threw the second fewest innings in the league last year. So, yeah, there were quick hooks. But the kind of why were there quick hooks, I feel like had gotten completely misconstrued or misunderstood. And we tried to kind of combat that during the year, but then it fell apart so much just overall for the rotation in the team that nobody wanted to hear, not excuses, but explanations for that. But, I mean, looking back on it now, it's not that the Twins and Baldelli or the pitching coach Pete Mackey had some huge epiphany this winter where they said, we're wrong how we're handling starting pitchers. Now we're going to let our pitchers go deep. Right. This has always been their approach to starting pitchers, is they always want 6 or 7 or certainly 5+. But the problem last year is 40% of their starts last year, I think 66 out of 162, were made by Chris Archer, who was like almost physically unable to pitch a lot of the times.
Right.
Great guy, and he gave it his all, but to get through 3 or 4 or 4 1/3 innings was just an incredible task for him every 5 days. Dylan Bundy, who did fine, but the idea of, well, we need a 6th or 7th inning from Dylan Bundy. Dylan Bundy was, trying to dance through raindrops, throwing 88-mile-an-hour fastballs last year, and then Delvin Smeltzer, again in there, who's a soft tossing lefty. The reason those guys got quick hooks in almost half of the Twins starts were because, A, they just they're not that good.
Right.
B, Archer was not even remotely healthy.
Right.
And then C, the Twins had no confidence in their ability to face a lineup the third time and decided to be proactive about it and not find out. Not find out what happens if you ask Chris Archer to pitch 6 innings, or what happens if you ask Dylan Bundy to face the 2, 3, 4 in a good lineup for a third time with an 87-mile-an-hour fastball and Smeltzer and all that. And so people looked at that and looked at the low totals for innings and also the bullpen struggling for long stretches last year and said, well, they just won't leave any starter. But the reality is, if you look at the 2 good starters and healthy starters they had last year, mostly healthy starters, was Sonny Gray and Joe Ryan, and they averaged more innings per start than the average starter, which is what you would expect. And so now they
also only started 51 of the 162 games.
That's the problem.
Right. Yeah, right.
The problem is
a third of the games, less than a third of the games. Right.
It's not that the Twins had some rigid organization-wide dogma against letting starters go 6 innings. That would be idiotic if you had that. It's that they had at most last year 2/5 of their rotation that they had any sort of confidence of being sort of hands-off with and not having to micromanage them within starts. And this year, so far, knock on wood, is much different. And Sonny Gray talked about that after his 13 strikeout start against the Astros. And his point was, last year, I felt, and also Joe Ryan, he said, felt, we had to be flawless in our starts because, especially if we were back-to-back, then what happens over the next 3 days? The team is just flailing away with pitching, and it almost felt like, oh, well, now I've pitched. Now let's wait till it gets back to the top of the rotation so we can get good starts again. And this is just a completely different story. Now, obviously, they're not going to have a sub-2 ERA all year as a rotation, and there's going to be some health stuff that comes up, and there's going to be some struggling performances. We've seen it, erode a little bit the last couple of days. But just the idea of you look at the schedule on your way to the ballpark, and you go, well, who's starting today? And there isn't a Delvin Smeltzer or a Dylan Bundy or a Chris Archer or a Chichi Gonzalez or a whatever spot starter. Now, maybe late in the season, that'll be a different story, but I just think this is how they would like to handle the starters. Not that they want starters to go 7, 8 complete games, all that stuff. That's not going to happen. The Twins are not, no team takes that approach now, but the Twins are definitely not taking that approach. But I actually don't think anything has changed in how Baldelli and Pete Mackey, the pitching coach, are handling the starters. I just think the talent involved and the health involved and the performances involved allows it to play out in a way that doesn't mean they have to have quick hooks and doesn't mean they're protecting guys from what they perceive to be really bad matchups, third time through the lineup. And that's not going to mean complete games, but it's going to mean, even when Tyler Mahle is at a, B-, C+ level yesterday for him, he still goes 6 innings because that's normal now for good, healthy pitchers. And I think, hopefully they'll continue to do that because I think putting that narrative aside, if not to bed, is good because it at least allows people to evaluate and analyze what they're seeing, as opposed to thinking this craziness about, Baldelli wants to remove every starter after 4 innings as if he thinks that's like the key to winning. Like, what?
It was always. Listen, there were times last year. I don't want to relitigate last year's rotation usage.
I'm always ready, Joe.
Right.
Objection.
But there were certainly times last year where I also thought, okay, this is not Bundy, this is not Archer, this is Sonny Gray, and I would like him to go one more inning out there. Right. We also, by the way, have seen times where they did that. They leaned into that late in the year, and it went very, very sideways, very, very fast. Third time through the year,
including with Sonny Gray.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Including with Sonny Gray. Right. And absolutely. And Joe Ryan. Right. That I remember back-to-back games. I think I remember the
pitchers have to also do their part to kind of not force the team to be overly protected about them.
Now you could argue maybe they would have performed better in August had they had the chance to do that earlier as well in May or something like that.
You could also argue that'd be more innings on their arm and they'd be worse.
It could be. So my point is, there were times last year where I felt kind of the same way. But I will say this. I think the outrage about that was based more on the frustration of watching Archer and Bundy.
Of course, yeah.
Right? I mean, I think Twins fans were I think it's similar to what kind of what the starting pitchers talk about now when they talk about momentum and they talk about building off each other and so on. We'll get to that in a second. But I think Twins fans would be sit there going, I'm going to watch Chris Archer go 4 2/3 and give up a bunch of runs, and I'm going to watch Dylan Bundy maybe get to the 6th inning.
Right.
And so, because you're frustrated watching that, when you see Joe Ryan get through, 5 2/3 innings, and there's a couple guys on base, and here comes the top of the order the third time again, you want to be like, no, please leave him in. Right. I don't, right? Yeah. And Sonny Gray, as a fan, that is your natural reaction, right? Whereas from the manager's standpoint, it's got to be like, I need to win this game because I've got 3 guys coming up tomorrow over the next 3 days that I don't trust on the mound. So
plus you toss in last year, and Sonny Gray will talk about this. He wasn't healthy last year. He wasn't hurt,
right?
But he was way behind in spring training because of the lockout, and just to get himself ready to start one of the first 5 games of last year, and he was like limited in terms of workload. He said this spring, I probably shouldn't have even been pitching the first few weeks last year.
Right.
And then he had hamstring injuries throughout the season. And like we mentioned a minute ago, when he did get opportunities to face the top of a lineup for a third time, which is usually in the 5th or 6th inning, he allowed like a 280 batting average. And I can think of 2 games at Target Field where he went out there for the 6th or sometimes the 7th and gave up back-to-back singles. And it's like, what do you want him to do here?
They lead out. Right. It's a 1-run game, and they give up back-to-back singles, right? And
that was the other problem, I think, and we've seen this still this year, but so many times they would get to like the 5th inning, even like in a Bundy or Archer start, let alone a Gray or Ryan start, and it would be like 3-2 or 2-1 or 2-2 or something like that, score. And when you're at that point, and Chris Archer's at 78 pitches, and he's looked a little shaky, and you go, well, do I really want to try to push this guy who's held together by duct tape at this point physically for a 5th inning in a game that is in the balance? Now, if the Twins had scored 6 runs at that point and it was 6-2, then it's much easier for a manager to be like, all right, let's let them roll through another inning. We'll get the bullpen warmed up and we'll see how it goes. But so often, I feel like, especially in those 3 guys, Smeltzer, Bundy, and Archer starts, they didn't pitch particularly well, but the offense very rarely came through. I mean, the offense was so boom or bust last year in general. And so it made the decisions on those starters higher leverage decisions because there were just few games where the Twins were just up 7-2 in the 4th inning, and you can say, all right, let's try to get an extra inning out of that. And we've seen that this year to some extent too.
We talked a lot last year about how it wasn't so much a philosophy. It was just they just didn't have the bullets. They didn't have the bullets in the rotation, and they didn't have the bullets in the bullpen. They didn't have a deep enough bullpen to cover those middle innings. And they didn't. And so you've got Baldelli being forced being forced to choose between 2 bad options, and almost you're going to look when you got two bad options. It doesn't matter which choice you make. You're going to look bad because neither one going to work out. Very
I remember,
well for you.
after watching the Twins bullpen, especially Pagan and other middle relievers and cough up leads after these short starts, it's easy and natural to be like, well, they got to stop with the short starts. But the Twins felt like all that's doing is changing who struggles in the middle innings,
right? Yeah.
And you could maybe make the argument, well, let's find out if that's true, but. Their thing was like,
but they do try that, and then it doesn't work that way, and then it's the other way.
And so, changing the narrative once it's in place, it's never going to be in place. People are going to be talking about short starts because the other thing is people lose sight of where the Twins are within the context of 30 teams. Right. And so, if you're only watching Twins games, even their starts now, they lead the league in average innings per start, and it's like 5.9. And I think if you just told the average Twins fan, oh, they're averaging 5.9 innings per start, they'd be like, oh, is that dead last in baseball? It's first in the league. And so I think there's the loss of that context, too, in terms of we've just reached a stage where 6 innings is the goal here, where it used to be even, when we started this podcast, it would be 7, certainly, or 8. And, complete games are totally out the window except for very unique circumstances. And so if you can lead the league at 5.9 innings per start, I mean, they would be thrilled to maintain that all season. Obviously, they probably won't. But you're still going to have fans who are like, well, yeah, I still don't like that. It should be 6-point-something innings per start or 7 innings per start. And it's like, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but you do have to kind of be – it's like complaining that, an NBA team you follow shoots too many three-pointers. It's like that may be true, but also look around the league.
Right.
That's how it works at this point. And I think short starts. To
get over 6, you've got to have as many 7s as you do 5s.
Well, you can't have 2 2/3 very often.
You can't have a 2 2/3 anyway. That's just
the one thing that I think, and we got into this a little last year, I remember, but it was an uphill battle to talk about this stuff. I never quite understand why it's like, I don't want to say morally better, but people feel it's like a crime against baseball to have a higher percentage of the innings go to the bullpen.
Right.
I never quite understood. Now, aesthetically, like in the playoffs, it's great to be like, oh my God, you got Scherzer versus Verlander, or 2 aces. It's great to do that. Right. And the shorter starts become the less important the individual starting pitcher is. And so you can't just say, oh, I'm picking the Dodgers because they got Kershaw on the mound. Well, if Kershaw's only going to go 5 2/3 or whatever. But beyond that, beyond the marquee matchup of it all, it was always weird to me that the idea of, well, it used to be the average starter went 6 or 7. Now the average starter goes 5 or 6, and but that inning or 2 just gets shifted to a bullpen that is A, has more people in it,
right,
and B is everyone throws 97,
right,
and there's so many great relievers that they're not even the top relievers on their team. I never quite understood why the concept of shifting an inning or 2 per game that normally would have been covered by a starting pitcher, shifting that workload or responsibility to the bullpen, why does that strike people so negatively? Like, why is that? Why are they so protective of the workloads of starters when relievers are generally on a per inning basis better?
Right. Yeah.
It's always strange to me, and it is a balance. You can't just have 3 inning starts and expect your bullpen to do that.
I kind of wonder if that is. I mean, I think that is generally the case for baseball fans everywhere. I wonder if that is even more so with Twins fans.
Well, just because Twins fans can just always go, "Hey, I watched Jack Morris go 10. How come they can't go 10?"
That's what I think. Blyleven and Morris,
sure,
and especially also as well as them being involved in the announcing team and talking about that sort of thing all the time.
Too, yeah.
Right? Is that a bigger deal for Twins fans than it is for something that? But to follow, just to maybe put a bow on part of this, is that same thing that was wrong last year. The perception that we've got to get squeeze as much out of the 2 good arms as we can, because we've got 3 bad arms. That script is totally flipped right now, and as a result, I feel like each of those starters feel a little bit more pressure to do well and to stay in the game because the guy before him and the guy after him do that. On the other hand, they also are easier. It's easier for them to write off not happening because they know the next day, I didn't have a great day, but I mean, I think we even have a quote from Mally yesterday.
Yeah,
he literally I didn't have a great day, but my head is on the mound tomorrow.
Yeah, he's like, I'm sure Kent will go out there and be great. No, I think you're right. It's
and he was like, I had a turd sandwich, but we kind of sandwich it between Ryan's great outing and my head's great outing.
No, I think it's
which, by the way, it wasn't a turd sandwich. It was fine.
No, it was fine. Right. I think you're right. I think the phrasing of it is tricky because it's like I think they don't feel less or more pressure to go deep now. I think they feel they're more motivated to go deep now.
I agree. Yeah,
because it's like a contest within
That's right.
Because to your point, they actually feel less pressure to force themselves through bad outings and try to stay in even if they're at 80% or whatever. Because there's less pressure because Gray and Ryan felt like last year, if I don't go 6, and the next 3 days our starters are going 4 1/3.
Gray talked about it this year.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I thought we're not going to get super into Sonny Gray, but we talked a lot about Sonny Gray
on Friday's
like
Patreon.
behind the scenes Sonny Gray, because he had a lot of interesting stuff to say and just a couple like little stories from the clubhouse and stuff. So if you want some of that after his great outing, 13 strikeout outing against Houston, we talked about him a ton on the last Patreon. So PATREON, patreon.com/Gleeman. Okay, there's just one other thing, pitching wise. I don't know. I had some notes about Gray, but I'll just go listen to the pitch. We did like 40 minutes on Sonny Gray, including like some behind the scenes stuff that only 7 people in the world could tell you about. I'm not saying it's like breathtaking information, but that's the type of stuff we try to pass along, especially on the Patreon. Is like little behind the scenes tidbits, little humanity,
and it gives us a chance to immediately react to like a big game, and a home opener is just a big game. Right?
Okay, so before we talk about Kepler and Wallner and Gallo and some of the outfield stuff, let's talk about our next sponsors. One of them is Raycon, which I've been using.
Raycon.
Yeah, it's wireless earbuds.
Right.
And I've been using them in the press box this year.
Oh, cool.
I used to use wired headphones because I'm an old man. I've switched to wireless because of the noise canceling and the sort of fit component. Because the people around me are incredibly annoying, and they have no respect for my need to do work. And I'm the same way when I'm not on.
Oh,
when I'm not writing.
You are right. Yeah.
I'd been there 5 minutes this season before Joe Young Park from MLB.com said, "I'm sick of you guys talking," and he went in the other room. But I have found that with my Raycon wireless earbuds, it blocks out a lot of the noise that annoys me. When there's other people typing or talking or transcribing audio or whatever, and I need to write.
Right.
And so I know you take them when you go on runs because it's good when you're jogging and running because the actual physical feel or fit on your ear is a lot better, I have found, and I think you have too, compared to some other brands, some more expensive brands. The battery life is really good. I, as someone who barely knows how to do anything technology-wise, pairing it with my laptop or my phone or whatever device from Bluetooth is super easy, even for a dummy like me, which is valuable.
And here's the big thing.
Yeah.
The price.
Yes, the price point.
This is just well-engineered earbuds for a portion of the price that you have to pay for like big name high brand earbuds.
Our listeners can get a further discount from that. You go to buyraycon, BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/Gleeman today. You get 15% off your Raycon order. That's buyraycon.com/Gleeman to score 15% off. Buyraycon.com/Gleeman.
And since you're going to be at the ballpark,
I just got a new shipment from Native Deodorant because guess what, everyone? They don't just do deodorant now.
Sunscreen.
Yes.
It did not come in time for my trip to spring training, but it's here for baseball.
And if you're at Target Field, now that it's actually going to warm up a little bit and the sun's going to come out a little bit, or if you're like me and you're just sitting in a chair in a press box in the sun for 5 hours at a time, put a little sunscreen on.
Yes.
Native Deodorant.
We are pale. We are pale Minnesotans. And spring has come fast, and so is baseball. And we're going to be outside. Let's get some protection on our skin. And what you can trust about Native is the same thing you trust about putting their deodorant on you. You know what's in it. You know that you don't have to worry about
natural ingredients spelled out on the packaging. You don't have to guess what kind of weird stuff is in there. Gives you good protection. it deserves with Native's mineral sunscreens. You go to Native DEO, DEO like deodorant. It's nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Use the promo code Gleeman at checkout and you will get 20% off your first order. That's nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Use the promo code Gleeman when you check out to get 20% off at nativedeo.com/Gleeman. Okay. Yeah, let's talk outfield.
Yes.
I guess. So Max Kepler hurt his knee running out of infield single in Miami on Monday.
Correct.
Which is what, April 3rd?
Yep.
Yeah,
right
week
after you hit the home run. The day when we were doing bumper to bumper, right?
That's right. And left the game. Initially, they thought, this is a day-to-day thing. He went for imaging and all that. And no big structural damage or anything. They were like, he just kind of tweaked his knee a couple days. They were hoping that, he's probably going to sit out the rest of that series. Then you had the off day, home opener, come back at some point during the Astros series. And actually on Saturday, he tested it pregame with doing some, 80% running a little bit on the field. And that didn't go well, basically. Right. Not a setback.
Pain decelerating.
Yeah, he was fine accelerating, but kind of slowing down. And I actually remember Buxton had the same thing when he had the hip problem last year or the year before. So after Saturday, they ditched the day-to-day.
You can backdate, moves to the injured list.
But only by 3 days.
But only by 3 days. So, right. They were already past that.
They were at 5, I think, by the time they put him on there. So he will be eligible to return from the injured list
Saturday
during the Yankee series in New York.
Yep.
I would probably guess that's unlikely mid-series. But they also then have an off day after that, and they go to Boston. Maybe the Boston series is more feasible. I think the problem with Kepler on some of these injuries, first of all, I looked this up. This is his 6th injured list stint in the last 3+ seasons. If you count this as, I'm telling you this is the plus in 3+. There have not been big injuries, but they've been a lot of different injuries. Legs, thumbs, elbows.
Did he have a COVID?
Yeah, he had one COVID on there. And he's tended, I would say, to 2 things. One, as we just saw, kind of remain on the active roster for a week or so, waiting out a day-to-day injury, and then ultimately going on the injured list.
Right.
Or, which is why this one is why I'm skeptical that he'll be back for the New York series. Once he's on the injured list, regardless of how substantial or not the injury was described initially, he's tending not to return when first eligible. And, that's not like a moral failing by Kepler, but I think that's worth noting. Like I wrote something about Wallner today, and under normal circumstances, Matt Wallner, who's their reigning minor league player of the year, and I ranked him as their 4th best prospect on my preseason thing. He's a Minnesota native, former Mr. Baseball Minnesota.
All right.
At Forest Lake as a pitcher, which I always like.
That's amazing.
And the Twins drafted him out of high school like in the 30th round, which doesn't even exist anymore, as a pitcher. And he turned them down, and he was going to go play, I think, at North Dakota State, and then they canceled the baseball program.
Oh,
South Dakota State, North Dakota State. I'm sorry, I'm angering people by not knowing college baseball. And so then he pivoted to Southern Mississippi, where he broke pretty much every hitting record there, owned by Brian Dozier, which is an interesting little thing. Right. And then after that, he was one of the great college players during that time. The Twins drafted him again, this time
as a hitter
with a supplemental first-round pick, like 30th or 40th overall, as a slugging right fielder. Right. Now, the nice thing when you were drafted out of high school as a pitcher, and he actually pitched a little in college as a reliever, just an absolute cannon in right field. Yeah. To the point that I asked Joey Gallo yesterday, who has an absolute cannon in right field.
I was going to ask you Baldelli, but okay. You also asked.
This was before that. Okay. I think this motivated the question to Baldelli later, which we're about to get to. And I said, comp-wise, do you look across here at Wallner, who was like literally across from him in the locker room, and think, that kind of seems like a Joe Gallo type. They're both like 6'4", 6'5". They're both, we call them beefy. Right. They're both better athletes than I think their size would suggest. They both have incredible left-handed raw power. They both draw some walks. Right. They both have great arms in right field or left field. And they
both
also
were pitching prospects in high school.
Right. They were both, which Baldelli scouted Gallo, he told us, in high school as a pitcher, and he threw 96, 97. And also, they're both going to strike out a lot. And Gallo was like hesitant to comp him too much, I think probably because he doesn't really know that much about Wallner as a player. But he did say, when we were doing like outfield drills in Fort Myers, and I'd be like standing next to him, or Gallo sometimes would be taking the throws at first base because they were working him out at first. He said, this guy's arm is ridiculous. And that's coming from a guy whose arm is ridiculous.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like Shaq telling Yao Ming he's tall. It's like, he's real tall.
Right.
And so I think, though, it's a lot different skill set. So Wallner was called up to replace Kepler on the roster. He started in right field yesterday. I think, generally speaking, I can see him lead off probably. But he's a left-handed bat. He's a right fielder. Right. It's a pretty seamless. I know people wanted Ed Julian called up, but that just in terms of a seamless.
In terms of replacing Kepler, the first one has to be up as a left-handed hitting corner outfielder.
And the reason we're talking about him more in depth, Wallner, as opposed to just saying, oh, someone's filling in for a week, is I'm somewhat skeptical that Kepler will be back in a week. And even if he is back in a week, I'm somewhat skeptical that 3 months from now, Max Kepler will be the everyday right fielder. And Matt Wallner will be at AAA.
Are we also a little skeptical when Joey Gallo will be back? Because he's also...
Joey Gallo, yes. I'll see how he is today. But I had a nice chat with Joey Gallo. Dan and I talked to him, just sort of shooting the S with him a little. And he seemed optimistic that he's going to avoid the injured list and all that. Okay. Now, with that said, the Twins seemed optimistic about Kepler doing the same. But we'll see. But
here's as Baldelli brought up, and as you went through when you went through the pitching matchups, they're seeing a lot of right-handed pitchers, a lot of really good right-handed pitchers.
The only lefty they're going to – first of all, they've only faced one lefty so far.
Right.
It was Jesus Luzardo, who that's a hell of a lefty to face. The next one they face is going to be Nestor Cortez. And then I think after that, the next one they face is going to be Chris Sale in Boston. So you're getting like 3 lefties in the first 20 games, which is not a lot.
Right.
I think the Red Sox, they're facing lefties in like 10 of their first 14 games or something like that, which is a whole nother issue. But Matt Wallner, I think, he played 18 games for the Twins last year down the stretch. Now, some people were kind of checked out at that point. It's hard to blame them. But so everyone got a glimpse. He handled himself decently, I thought. Had a long homer off Shane Bieber, which was a good one for his first, I think it was his first hit, definitely his first homer. Like I said, Forest Lake native.
You're right.
Big raw power. He's improved his plate discipline or walk drawing ability. He drew 97 walks last year in the minors. And it's what we talk about with guys like Gallo or guys like Sano. A lot of people just see a high strikeout rate and a low batting average and think this guy swings at everything. Matt Wallner does not swing at everything.
Right.
Matt Wallner gets deep in counts trying to draw walks or get crushable pitches, and then he gets the 2 strikes as part of that. And he has a lot of swing and miss when he does swing, which leads to a lot of strikeouts. But from a skill set standpoint, he's a lot different than Kepler. I mean, Kepler, both offensively and defensively, like Kepler looks like he should be a great baseball player. Like if you just watched him, I always say if there were no stats kept, everyone would assume Max Kepler was like a 6-time All-Star because he is smooth in everything he does. He does everything reasonably well. He's a good athlete for his size. He's capable of hitting long homers. He's capable of stealing bases. He's a really good right fielder, good range, good arm, all that stuff. Yep. And then you look at the end of the year and you go, well, how's he hitting 217?
Right.
And he doesn't even strike out a lot, which is the most kind of frustrating thing that breaks people's brains when they try to evaluate Max Kepler. Yep. It's because, and we've talked about this a lot, but he strikes out less than the average hitter, like by far. He struck out almost at like half of the league average rate last year. And then you think, how can a guy who never strikes out or rarely strikes out hit 230 for his career and 215 in the last few years? It's because the caliber of the balls that he puts in play, what he does with all that contact, has so much less value than kind of an average hitter because some of it is shift related, but I don't think that's going to magically fix anything. He just hits so many easy to field pop-ups and weak fly balls and 3 hoppers to second base and all that stuff. And so it's like, it's great that he doesn't strike out. Those are automatic outs. But so many of the balls that he makes contact with are 99% outs anyway. Matt Wallner does not have that problem.
Right.
Matt Wallner's problem is putting the ball in play. When Matt Wallner hits a ball, he hits it. Like it goes very far and very hard.
Right.
And his batting average on balls in play is almost certainly going to be better than the average hitter. I mean, if it's not, he's not going to have a career because he hits the crap out of the ball. And, he has the type of power that Kepler has shown in 2019, but not really since then. I think the batting averages might be similar, but how they get to that 225, 230 batting average is just so much different.
And the on-base percentage might be somewhere.
Yes, because Kepler does draw walks. I think Wallner is going to draw walks,
whether or not one can hit the not out of the ball.
And, defensively, it's also much different, which is that Kepler has an okay arm, but Kepler is just so smooth and gets good jumps and just sort of glides after balls into that right center field gap and just gets to he robs extra base hits. Wallner, it takes him a while to get underway because he's huge. I actually think he's sort of similar to Larnach in that if you give him like 10 steps and then evaluate them, they're pretty fast. Yeah. But it's those kind of getting moving.
Right.
They're like a car that needs a push. You know what I mean? Like
there was a shot into the gap yesterday that he ended up getting to before Taylor got over on the warning track. And I was like, hold it, is that Wallner?
Yeah, I think
ranging that far. I think he
looks awkward out there because he's huge. I don't know that his instincts are always the best, but once underway, he's actually pretty fast.
I actually agree.
And being huge, I think this has helped Larnach too. This helps Aaron Judge too. By the way, you get to balls. Not that Max Kepler's tiny or anything, but when you're 6'5", which Gallo is too, you just get to balls that. It makes
you get
up
a little
for,
bit more of a stride.
Yeah, you get another half step just because you're massive and your arm span and all that. So I think Kepler is the skill set that tends to be overrated because he doesn't strike out a lot, and people assume that means that he's a more disciplined hitter, and he looks smooth and he's a good athlete and all that stuff. But the overall production has been lacking. I think Wallner is the opposite. I think Wallner has a skill set that tends to be underrated because people are still so obsessed with strikeouts and batting average, and he's never going to hit 280. Yeah. The goal for him is to hit like 240, 250 because if that comes along with 30 homers and 75 walks and passable range in right field with a top of the scale throwing arm, which we saw the value of that with like Michael Kadire over the years. That's a pretty good player to the point that I'm kind of at. I mean, look, we talked about Kepler as a trade candidate all offseason. Right. I've been ready to move on for Kepler for a while now. And if it's just a minor injury, he's going to come back. They'll send down Wallner, and this discussion will be moot for a while. But it's not hard to see that there's a changing of the guard coming here. Right. Sooner than later. I mean, certainly by next season.
Well, I mean, both Gallo's going to be a free agent over the offseason, and Kepler has an option, a team option. So there will be openings in the corner spots for
my question.
Wallner,
I guess
Larnach, Kirilloff. Right.
Yeah. If let's say Wallner gets 2 weeks here before Kepler comes back and plays a dozen games or something on top of the 18 he played last year, and let's say. He hits 250 and he pops a few homers and he draws some walks and he throws a guy or two out on the bases and you look at him and you go, all right, this guy's just won minor league player of the year for us. He's off to a good start at AAA before we called him up. The skill, power-wise, arm-wise, it's clearly there. He's a flawed player. Are we that committed to sending him back to St. Paul?
Yeah, I don't know.
And kind of sticking with Max Kepler? I would say they are. I mean, a minor knee injury is not going to change their plans that much, but I thought their plan with Kepler was kind of questionable to begin with. I mean, we talked a lot about this during the offseason of we're sticking with Kepler. They could have traded him. They could have essentially dumped him. They insisted. I talked to a Twins official at the winter meetings who said this isn't even a Urshela situation. We can get an actual player for him.
Right.
And they didn't. And I just kept thinking, if that's true, do it.
Right, yeah.
Not only do you get return for a guy who I think is on the downswing of his career and is no longer in your long-term plans, obviously, but it clears $8.5 million that you could have used on a pitcher or you could have used on a whatever. And I'd feel
a lot more strongly about it if Kirilloff was healthy. If I had faith that Kirilloff,
I don't think Kirilov's going to play the outfield anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, once in a while.
Right.
But I don't like. We used to think of Kirilloff and Larnach as the corner outfielders.
Correct.
I think Kirilloff is going to be a first base DH. Yeah. Occasional
I think we had enough questions coming into this year about whether or not Gallo can bounce back, and I mean we still have some questions about that, right? Kirilloff's health, Larnach's health, we had questions about his health, right, coming into the year.
Yep.
That, okay, maybe hanging on to Kepler, not such a bad idea at this point, right?
Once they traded, our assumption, I think, or especially my assumption early, was Kepler was going to get traded to lessen the left-handed hitting logjam for these guys that we're talking about. Instead, they kept Kepler and traded Arise, which sort of had a similar effect.
Yeah,
now you can debate if that was the right thing too, although Pablo Lopez certainly looks really good right now. I would have
You weren't getting Pablo Lopez for
Max Kepler.
No.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Twins tried.
Well, they would have been
I'm sure.
Yeah, they'd be like, would you?
People told me they were trying to work on a package.
Would you guys take Max Kepler for Pablo Lopez? And I'm sure the Marlins were like, yeah, if you throw in Luis Arraez, we'd think about that. So I think, I don't know. There is a, the potential outcomes with Wallner in terms of his career, the next 5 years, let's say, are pretty extreme.
Yep.
Like he could be Brent Rooker 2.0 as a left-handed hitter, although he's in the majors still. I still think Brent Rooker can hit a little bit, or he could be, a poor man's Joey Gallo.
Right.
He could be something closer to like what we think Larnach's upside is, if he can kind of get the strikeouts a little bit pared down. A 260, 30 homer walk drawing guy. All those are very intriguing. I mean, it's what we talked about on the depth side a lot this offseason, which, yes, they went out and got Kyle Farmer and Michael Taylor and Donovan Solano, these kind of veteran, high-end bench guys. But what they also have from a depth standpoint is instead of having to turn, Kepler gets hurt a week into the season. Instead of turning to Mark Contreras or Ryan Lamar or whatever to fill in for 2 weeks, where you're just sort of trying to get by, they actually have a top prospect who has immediate upside, but also has the ability to show that he can be kind of a long-term puzzle piece here. Yeah. And that is always we talk about that a lot going back 10 years. That to me is the most exciting. When you can start to bring up people as injury fill-ins or mid-season replacements, and they're not just placeholders. They're not just seat fillers. They're a guy where you go, well, hell, Wallner might be their number 5 hitter for the next 5 years if things go well.
And you've got this sort of organic opportunity for Wallner as well.
Right.
Okay, let's get him 2 weeks in here and see what happens. And, in 2 weeks from now, we might be like, geez, do we really want to send this guy down?
Right. Or 2 weeks from now, somebody else might be hurt.
Right.
And there isn't even a roster crunch when Kepler comes back.
Or 2 weeks from now, we're like, let's send him down. Let's give him a little bit more time.
Which isn't the end of the world.
That's fine. Right.
Yeah. It's a good opportunity for him, I think, they like Wallner, and I think he's a good prospect, but, the flaws with Wallner are easy to see, and it's
real.
He needs to not disprove them, but he needs to basically either show that he can lessen his weaknesses a little bit, or needs to show that his strengths, which is power, are just so strong that you're perfectly happy to live with a 240 batting average or a 230 batting average. And I think all those things are possible. It is kind of funny that, I tried to get Baldelli to comp Gallo and Wallner, which is what you mentioned. And
you also asked him which one has the better arm.
So which one has? Somebody else might have been Dan. Said which one has the better arm,
that's right.
and Baldelli's answer was, "Well, let's just look at Statcast after they've thrown a few," which that's fair. Yeah. And then I said later, and I smiled as I said this because it's 3 years now of me trying to get Rocco Baldelli to agree with a player comp. When I say, doesn't this guy kind of remind you of this guy? And I laid it out for him. I said, look, these are big, beefy boys. They're both 6'4", 6'5". They both got top of the scale raw power from the left side, top of the scale throwing arms. They're also more athletic than they might first appear, and they also both strike out a ton.
Right.
This seems like a pretty decent player comp. And what he said to me, I said, look, this is the funniest quote ever.
I
didn't use this quote, but here was
his
initial response to me saying that, because all I needed him to say for the purposes of
what he basically said was, what he's basically telling you in this is, quit trying to make me talk about player comps. I don't like them.
Yes.
This is how this starts.
Here's what it. He said, I would say this, and he's like smirking at me. There are some general similarities in the players, and probably leave it at that. And I was like,
no, but you want to keep going? You still have more from that?
No, but I can paraphrase. But
basically his point was, in general, I'm just not a big fan of player comps.
Right, which period. I know.
Right. Yeah,
so after we stopped recording and I said, I'm going to get you one of these times. One of these times you're going to forget you hate comps.
Exactly the same person.
Yeah, and you're going to go, that's not bad, Aaron. And then you're going to like explode in a ball of fire or something. But yeah, I mean, I think, is that a player type that you want to have lineups built around? No. The boomer bust. We saw it with Sano. You're going to see it with Gallo. It can be frustrating when it goes poorly. The slumps are longer than most. Aesthetically, there are people who are never going to be fans of the high strikeout, low average slugger because they just hate strikeouts and batting average. But to have one or two of those guys in a lineup to just change games once a week with one swing, let's say, I think can be hugely valuable. And in Wallner's case, when you're making the league minimum for the next 3 or 4 years, that is the big difference with me with Kepler, which is like they don't need $8 million. It's not like they're in a salary cap crunch like the Vikings or something like that. But is the difference between Kepler and Wallner at this point anything, really, in terms of how you would project them going forward? If anything, I might project Wallner better. And if the difference is $8 million in salary plus whatever value, minimal as it may be, you could get by trading Kepler, you sort of start to see the writing on the wall here. So my question is just, does this happen this season or does this happen?
It's a storyline to follow through this season. No question about that. So.
Okay. Before we move on to some other news and notes, let's talk about Stamps.com. I always talk about how I used Stamps.com for like months on end a few years ago when I was sending out autographed copies of my book that I wrote about the Twins. And I turned like my living room into like a processing plant, basically, or an assembly line. And I had never used Stamps.com before that, and the experience using it was so great. It saved me from going insane because it saved me from having to make 800 trips a week to the post office.
Right.
I had my own scale. I was printing out my own postage, and you could do it in a way that you feel like you were not wasting money by just overpaying for certain postage.
Right.
Because you can get real specific about it. It'll give you barcodes on each package so that you can actually track the packages. So I could tell, did a book get delivered when someone asked about where it is? And it was also just super easy to use from a technology standpoint of you enter in a few things, you click print, you throw it on there, you can track all your packages, you can track your spending, you can track all that stuff. I found it to be super useful and kept me from just the busy work of constantly having to go get stamps and go to the post office and being...
Right. And you won't believe all the stuff they give you on this. So, first of all, different promo code than usual. Usually promo code's Gleeman. This time promo code is Geek.
Congratulations.
Right? So sign up with the promo code Geek for a special offer. It includes a 4-week trial and free postage and a free digital scale.
Yes.
So no long-term no long-term commitments or contracts or anything like that. You just go to stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the page, and enter Geek. So again, to get a 4-week trial, free postage, and a digital scale at stamps.com and go to the top of the page and enter the code GEEK for your special offer from Gleeman and Geek.
Okay. Let me see if I had any other Kepler Wallner notes. I had some other stuff here too. Let's see. I talked about Wallner. I mean, I think I looked. Here's how I would describe him. 90th percentile power, 99th percentile arm strength, 70th percentile speed, but it takes a minute to kind of get rolling, and then 5th percentile contact ability. So keep that in mind as you watch him so far. I think the other thing, he has pretty neutral, or he's shown pretty neutral platoon splits for a left-handed hitter so far, which I think a lot of people would assume that a high strikeout guy would be more susceptible to lefties. Now, this is against the minor leaguers for the most part, but he does have a pretty good eye at the plate, and I think he can use – he's not just a dead pull hitter, and I actually think he's gotten a lot better last year about using all fields. I mean, he has legit power to all fields. It's not just, Kepler has big time power, but it has to be to right or right center most of the time. I think Wallner is more similar to Larnach in that he can go out to left center, he can go to center, and I think that helps him, especially against lefties. So, and that would be nice too because they're lacking in right-handed hitting corner outfielders.
Yeah.
They're kind of missing a Kyle Garlick right now on the roster.
He's sitting down in St. Paul right now, and could have been called up.
He's off to a good start.
I think if they were facing more left-handers, we might have had a chance of getting up here.
But for the most part, they're always going to have one more lefty in the lineup against left-handed pitchers than you would kind of like, ideally, just because they don't have enough right-handed outfield bats. And so we know over the years that Kepler has pretty consistently struggled against lefties, and most lefties struggle against lefties. But I think there's at least we need to find out if Wallner is able to kind of hold his own and not be
what level he's at. Is he
right? All lefties are going to be worse against lefties, except for like Ichiro.
Is he a little worse than average, or is he just
or is he helpless?
Basically. The other thing I definitely remember this about him in AAA. I think I remember this about him in AA as well. When he went up to that level.
Yeah,
he struggled.
Yes,
he struggled initially.
I think he was like 1 for 20 last year or something.
I mean, last year in AAA, his first month at St. Paul, and then it was like a light switch flicked.
Yeah, he hit for the cycle, I remember, and
he just immediately became hot as fire. Right. So it'll be. I mean, and he did have some time here last year. He did spend spring training with the team and get into a lot of games and face that level pitching.
He even said yesterday,
spring training level pitching.
When we talked to him pregame, just like how much. Coming into this clubhouse for the second time when it's
much more comfortable,
especially when things are not eroding around you in September, and you're all of a sudden batting fifth for a team that was in first place and now is in third place and all that stuff. And like you said, he spent all spring in big league camp, and you show up and you're batting seventh, and it's like, all right, things are going reasonably well here. Maybe I can find a groove a little sooner. But I mean, that skill set is going to be susceptible to slumps. Right. Sometimes it's right away. Sometimes it's after a hot start. I mean, a normal player's 2 for 20 might be a 2 for 30 with a guy who just doesn't make as much contact. And you have to be willing to live with that.
So I would suggest don't read too much if he does struggle in this 2-week trial period.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll see.
Okay. A few other lineup things, I guess. We're almost done here, I guess. But we talked about it's been boom or bust. It sounds like Polanco, he rehabbed again Saturday and took Sunday off, I want to say. He's been at correct. Low A Fort Myers. He's
seven innings,
played second base.
Yep.
Had a couple hits or a couple times on base, at least in the last one. Talking to the new head trainer, Nick Paparesta, who I should credit. We talked more about this on the Patreon, which people should be subscribing to. But he is a breath of fresh air from a sort of information standpoint. It was very difficult at times last year, partly just because of the sheer number of injuries that they had, but partly because teams tend to be kind of secretive about this stuff. It was very difficult to get kind of straight answers or updated information about the many injuries that they had. And one of the things I tried to stress to a couple of Twins officials was, I know you guys think it benefits you to kind of protect injured players by not saying too much and not giving updated timelines and all that stuff. But my feeling is that in reality, it does them a disservice, going back to the Joe Mauer days with the bilateral leg thing. Right. If you don't make information public, or you don't tell reporters and they can't write about it, or radio people, whatever it is, if you leave the fan base with little to no information, they will fill in the blanks themselves. And the way those blanks get filled in is not going to always be accurate, and it's not always going to be to the team's benefit. And you start going to hear conspiracy theories and this player's soft and all that stuff. And so I do think teams are better off having at least one person who is able and willing to, not on a day-to-day basis, but once a homestand, give a kind of state of the injured list situation. And Paparesta, who's a multi-time trainer of the year in MLB, he's got a couple decades with the A's, before that with the Rays, talking to him for the first time in this setting, before the first game of this homestand, It was great. I mean, it's not like he was revealing inside information about these guys' personal lives, but he would answer a question about Jorge Polanco's rehab, or he would answer a question about Max Kepler's knee in a way that it was at least informative.
Sure.
And that is such a big change. Yep. Over last year for the Twins, and the case with a lot of teams.
Yeah, sometimes that is they're trying to protect the players. Sometimes it's it's just from a HIPAA thing. You've got to be careful what you reveal and what you don't reveal. Sometimes it's I'm just not a particularly good communicator.
Yep. They're just not comfortable doing it. And sometimes it's just there's been so many injuries that everyone's just sick of it.
Right.
That's what happened with Baldelli, I would say, last year.
That's true.
And so Baldelli, understandably, Gardenhire had the same thing at the end of his tenure with the Twins. He's sick of just spending 15 minutes a day running through injured list updates. And my point was, well, that's fine, but somebody has to do that. And
especially first game of a homestand.
Well, right. But Nick Paparesta was very good, and I hope he can prove to be a good source of information that we can then pass on to fans in a way that kind of keeps people from having to fill in the blanks on a lot of this stuff.
It's also clear that it's significant in that it takes something off of Baldelli's plate.
Sure.
For those things. Baldelli doesn't want to think about the injuries because he wants to concentrate on today's game. He doesn't want to sit there and yearn for Polanco to be back so he's got a leadoff batter. He just wants to come up with something for the leadoff batter.
I mean, let's be honest. He's getting these updates in the same way that we begin.
Right.
It's not like he's in Fort Myers, and so he's reading an email in the morning that says, hey, Jorge played 6 innings at second base, came out of it pretty well. Then one of us are asking, and he says to us, well, Jorge came out of it pretty well and played 6. Right. It's like, okay, but whereas
when you ask for more information, he doesn't have it. Right. Paparesta has it.
Right. And so Paparesta has been, having phone calls with Polanco after each game. It sounds like, from a health standpoint, obviously Polanco needs to avoid having another setback with the knee where it needs fluid drain and it's sore. But even assuming the knee is kind of stabilized here from a health standpoint, they just want him to get at bats because he basically missed all of spring training. Right. So they want him to get 30 or 40 at bats. The question I think at this point is, does he stay in Fort Myers, which is their year-long complex? It's sort of Twins South, basically.
Right.
Or do they move him up to St. Paul, which is 15 minutes away from Target Field, but a higher level of competition and a little more of a big league feel to it? Like a little more, these at-bats matter. And so I think that's the bigger question with Polanco. I don't think his return is imminent, but the maximum for a rehab assignment is 20 days. And so I think you're definitely going to see him, if things continue to progress well and he doesn't get shut down, he'll end up at St. Paul at the tail end of it, certainly, in which case the results of his at-bats matter a little bit more than just getting the at-bats and playing.
St. Paul's on the road this upcoming week. They'll be in Indianapolis.
Right.
So you could see something where maybe he spends another week or something in Fort Myers and then comes back when they're back at home. Or the fact that it's going to be 70-some degrees in Indianapolis all week might be reason enough to send him to Indianapolis.
With Kirilloff, he is not a rehab assignment is not imminent. He's in extended spring training, which is also in Fort Myers, but different than playing in games. Still trying to build up that wrist. Still trying to add strength and avoid soreness, all that stuff, getting live at bats. It didn't sound like they're close as of a couple days ago to him going on a rehab assignment when you can sort of start to get an ETA on things. I got an Austin Martin update where they're hoping he's like 2-3 weeks away from starting to be able to do some throwing and normal baseball activities. Now he needs to still avoid surgery, so once those 2-3 weeks happen and he starts to get back on the field and do some things, there's a danger that they go, this elbow is just no good.
We talked a little bit on the Patreon about how it's to some extent because Tommy John surgery takes less time to come back from for a position player than for a pitcher. They sort of had the luxury of being able to test out rehab assignment for at least another month or so without having to worry about it impacting next year.
Yeah,
either way, you're losing this year.
Yes, either way, you're out for this year, and your recovery is going to drag into the offseason. So an extra month to see if you can avoid it is what they're trying to do. Let's see. We'll run through a couple more quick notes here. So I would expect Polanco to return much sooner, if he returns, than Kirilloff. Let's see. Buxton has played all but one game. We'll see if he's in the lineup today. Phenomenal so far, I would say. Hitting, running, no impact defensively, but that's part of the plan. Had the 3-run homer just a line shot against Houston. That's how his tend to be. They don't spend a lot of time in the air.
No, they've got some velocity to them.
And you got the him paying tribute to his dad with the trucker horn, which I like. The buck truck or whatever they're calling it. His dad was there.
Oh, I
almost asked his dad. I'm very curious. I need to find out. His dad was playing with the Suns, and I almost asked him, "Are you still a trucker?" Because his dad's not that old. He's like, no offense, but he's like your age. And John's still working, if you want to call this work. And I wanted to know.
My kid is not much younger than Byron Buxton. Just
right.
I mean, about the same.
I wanted to know, when your son signs a $100 million deal, and you've been a long haul trucker or whatever for your whole career, which is a tough job. Yeah. Do you immediately quit doing that, or do you actually love that job?
Yeah.
So maybe if I see him today, I'll ask him about that.
324 batting average for Buxton now.
The extra base power's been there. I think the
500 slugging percentage.
The quality of at bats has been there.
Yep.
I think the chances he's had to let loose a little bit on the bases, he's looked pretty good. I don't think it's eminent seeing him in center. The way they talked about it, I mean, that was one of the ways they could try to replace Kepler. Is start
Taylor in one of the corner outfield spots and
Buxton back to center a little, but I don't think that's going to happen. Baldelli essentially said, he's been so good, and we're playing him almost every day. Why are we messing with that unless we feel really confident? And so I would think May.
I wondered the same thing. We talked a little bit about this on the Bumper to Bumper about whether or not they ever get tempted to just say, screw it, we're just going to keep him at DH for the whole year because we know we'll keep him healthy. We think that'll keep him healthy. I also thought the same thing about as Gallo got on a hot streak at first base. I know they left him in the corner outfield spots, but if he's hitting and they perceive it as, well, he doesn't have as much to think about because he's sitting at first base or whatever the hell it is. Yeah. I wonder if that would also be tempting at some point.
Know. I think at some point Buxton's going to want to,
of course,
catch some balls.
I know.
I think Gallo, talking to him yesterday, he was like, he doesn't mind playing first, and he's quite good at playing first. Right. But you talked about his arm. Right. I think he misses,
of course,
uncorking a throw to third base once in a while.
The one place you don't want that arm.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar. Like when they moved Sano from third to first, it was like, that's logical. Like, I mean, he's not a great third baseman, but the one skill he has that's a big strength defensively is just an incredible arm. And instead of seeing that, 150 times a year at third, you're going to see it 15 times a year at first.
The only time you get to see that arm is on that 3-2-4 double play.
Yeah, which he did start.
He started one of them, and then Solano started the other one yesterday.
Well, there was on the interference play. Yeah, Solano also had one of the worst plays I've seen at first base.
Oh, my goodness.
He bobbled it, and then had he just picked the ball up after bobbling it and flipped it normally to first, he would have had the runner because the runner stopped. It was Abreu.
Right.
Instead, he tried to do like a no-look flip pass, and it just sailed over the other guy's head, and it was like, oh, boy. That's one of those plays. They talk about shortstops will often talk about an internal clock.
Right.
When you've played 20 years of shortstop in your life, where based on the runner, without even looking where the runner is, I'm deep in the hole, I got to get rid of it, or I got some time here. You'll see Correa do this. The internal clock abandoned Donovan Solano because he just thought, oh no, I just made a terrible play. I need to flip this ball behind my back to get it to first.
So what happened on that play, though? It wasn't that he bobbled it, right? It was that he was caught in between. He thought he wanted that ball to roll foul.
Right. And that's right down the line.
Right, because they had runners on first and second, and they were going to end up at second and third with one out. If he ended up playing, he could have just picked it up and touched first base, but then the runners are going to advance. So he wants the ball to go foul. It looks like it's going to go foul. It gets all the way to the base, hits the base, and then pops up because it hits the base.
I mean, it was a tricky play. I don't mean to say it wasn't a tricky play.
So my point is, the internal clock, that internal clock had totally abandoned him by them. He'd already made a half a dozen. He had decision fatigue over about a 6 second.
And then he did the equivalent of stepping on a rake in your front lawn, just where your brain is just like, oh no.
Right.
But then they turned the home to first double play because Kyle Tucker got hit in the elbow basically by the return throw to first because he was inside the baseline. Good. So they called him out, and not only did they get a double play on that, but then the runners had to return to their bases, which is ridiculous. They had to go back to first and second. That's what we had. One of the umpire coordinators was behind us in the press box, and he explained it.
I was wondering about that.
It's like a dead ball, basically, so they have to go back, which is like a double penalty because those guys should have been on second and third. They were already there by the time to throw. And then Tucker also got booted from the game,
right? Yes.
Which is what is the argument there? Like you got hit in the elbow by a ball that the first baseman basically caught. Right. I can tell you where you were in the you know what I mean. You weren't on third base because your elbow wouldn't have been there.
Right.
I don't know. It was funny. Let's see a few other things, and I'll get out of here. I like to hit everything for you guys. All my notes. Ryan Jeffers has thrown out 3 of 5 stolen base attempts against him so far, which you think, okay, big deal. Last year he was 7 out of 38. Throwing up bases.
When they threw that out yesterday, I didn't even think about the fact that was Jeffers being on the plate. Huh. 1 of 2 yesterday, right?
Yeah, 1 of 2 yesterday. Yep. And he's talked about it a little bit. Like they tried to kind of smooth out his mechanics a little bit. He's never going to be, Johnny Bench back there. But he's a good pitch framer. The pitchers seem to like working with him. If you can just get his arm to, palatable levels, it at least stops teams from going nuts on the bases, which we're seeing quite a few, including the White. I looked today. The White Sox are 13 for 13 stealing bases.
Really?
You know what the Twins are so far?
0 for 0?
No, close.
0 for 1?
I know they'd be better that way. They're 1 for 3.
Okay.
Michael Taylor has a steal. Willie Castro was thrown out, and then Wallner essentially got picked yesterday, which counted as a caught stealing. I am going to predict.
Is that counted as a caught stealing because the ball comes from the catcher?
No, it counts because he broke for second and then went back. I think it's the runner.
Yeah, okay.
Like the moment, like where's the runner trying to?
I was wondering that as I was having it.
It was. I don't know what the F was going on. It was a quick post game, so I didn't have a chance to. Maybe I'll ask today, but like he wasn't trying to steal there.
No.
I don't think it was a hit and run. That would have been a real strange I think it was the first pitch.
I think he was just trying to get a couple more steps in case there was a.
My worry is he just sort of zoned out a little bit and just, they backpicked him. My perception is that Jose Miranda is hitting the ball much better than his batting average.
I agree with you.
He's had a couple hard hit balls get caught. He's had a couple go foul that would have changed some games.
Yep.
And he's had some big hits so far. And so I'm just going on record here that I think he'll have a good couple of weeks here.
I am waiting for him to heat up.
Yeah.
My perception is that Nick Gordon is not hitting the ball better than his batting
average. No, although
right
I don't even think he's struck out yet. But he hasn't looked great, and they could definitely use that as a left-handed bat.
They got rid of their experiment. They gave up on having a left-handed leadoff hitter, seemingly, versus right-handed pitching.
Well, they're just out.
Right.
If you thought Kepler was a weird choice,
right.
Gallo or Wallner.
When Kepler's hurt and Gordon is bad or struggling, I will just say.
We should. I guess we can finish on this, but it's an interesting little thing, which is Gallo on opening day in Kansas City. Might have been his first at bat of the season. Hit a hard ground ball between first and second, and it got past the infield, and it got into the outfield.
Right.
Where the right fielder, who's actually a catcher playing right field, MJ Melendez for the Royals, the right fielder was shifted about, I don't know, what would you say, 25 feet further in than a normal right fielder would be?
I would say deeper, closer than that. I mean, he was he was where the second baseman used to play during this shift.
Right. The last 5 years, where you would often see a second baseman play a left-handed, short right field or deep second, however you want to say that. And the ball went right to him, which would have been a single in the 80s or the 90s because he hit it past the second baseman. But Melendez was there in right field, scooped it up, perfectly, kind of drew back his arm to throw him out at first base, and then dropped the ball. And Gallo ran through the base, and he was safe. And immediately they called that an error.
Right.
And my thought at the time was,
yeah, that's an error.
No, I thought the opposite, which is how can there be an error on what would have been a 9-3 put out? Like just logically. Do you know what I mean? That's not a normal, because one of the definitions of an error is, was it a routine play not made?
But like it was a routine error play not made.
Not a routine play.
He just wasn't in a routine position, but it was a routine play. You know what I mean?
For a guy 50 feet into the outfield to throw a guy out at first base?
There was no question in my mind that if he picks that ball up cleanly and throws it to first base, Gallo's out.
See, I think it would have been at best a bang-bang play.
Okay, all right. Okay.
But that's sort of separate. But my thought was, and this, by the way, is why I think the Royals are stupid for positioning him like that.
Right. Yes.
But
okay. If you're not going to get him anyway, then why have him there?
Correct.
Right.
I mean, I thought that as soon as I saw it, I'm like, this is the dumbest of both worlds. Like, this is not anything. Either shift or don't. But this is not. This is minimizing all your ability to make outs on plays. But I think if he would have been another 15 feet in or 10 feet in, where you could more realistically call it deep second as opposed to short right, then you could sort of convince me. I mean, that's a play like Polanco made at times last year.
Sure.
But he was deeper than that.
Okay.
And, I mean,
I'd have to take a look at the play again.
And here's the other thing I thought of, which is like, I remember this was a thing with Ichiro during his career because he's incredibly fast. You do have to account for the speed of a base runner when you're evaluating whether a play for like a third baseman is an error.
Sure.
Because if Albert Pujols hits a sharp two-hopper to third and the third baseman bounces it over there, it's an error because you could have walked it over there for Albert Pujols. But if Ichiro hits a two-hopper to third and the guy knows his internal clock, knows I got to get this ball over there in a hurry, well, I'd be less prone to call it an error because it's Ichiro has created the situation. So I would flip that for this type of play, and I would say, look, first of all, it's a right fielder. It's not a second baseman. And it's a slow-footed catcher who's probably never made that play in his life as a second baseman. I do think you have to factor that in. So this is a long way of saying Saturday, first of all, MLB announced that call had been overturned.
Right.
The error that
Twins made a case that it was actually a hit.
The error had been changed into a single for Gallo. His batting average went from like 225 to 278 or something like that. And we found out the past couple of days talking to people, including Gallo, the Twins basically agreed with what I was saying and built a case for Gallo that they then sent into the league office as an appeal. And you have to present data, you have to present video, you have to present sort of comparable plays that you can show that were called in the way you're presenting it. And they also wanted to show that it's been a really long time since those plays were made. It's only a 9-3 putout with a guy, midway between deep second and short right is only a thing right now because of the shift limitations. Because there was no reason to have to play your right fielder that way. You just play your second baseman that way. And so what they needed to do was go back in baseball history and find out how rare that type of play, a 9-3 putout, would have been. And so you think, well, what would you use to do that? Well, you'd use StatHead, which they're an advertiser, but I would say this anyway, which used to be the Baseball Reference Play Index. And then you think it'd be really good to kind of have an in at the Baseball Reference Play Index. And then they thought, actually, let's get the guy who built the Baseball Reference Play Index. And lucky for us, he's a team employee.
Hans was in it?
Yes.
Hans, that's cool.
Hans von Sluten, who is, I'd say, a friend of the podcast.
Yeah, he used to listen to the podcast.
I know, but he used to come to events and stuff. Now he's a little too good for us. But
I just saw him the other day.
Tremendous
the Twins,
guy, first of all. With a lovely family that we've gotten to know over the years. A genius developer and good
database guy.
Database builder. And so he literally was the, I think, chief developer for the Baseball Reference Play Index, which is now StatHead. And in 2018, the Twins hired him away to kind of build their database and information system. And so he's got credit from Baldelli, which you have not lived until you've heard Rocco Baldelli shout out the nerds in the front office and say, well, Hans von Sluten really, because that's, first of all, a great name. And so I asked Hans, and he's like, yeah, it became a whole Slack thing where we were spending hours on Slack. All the brain power, Nick Beauchamp, who's another front office guy, and a few other people were working on it, and they built a case for Gallo. And then it was very funny to then talk to Gallo about it and say, did they present you with this hit? And he said, no, but they knew how excited I would be about it because I rarely get singles. And they were very excited about it too, because I think what gave Baldelli a thrill about it was he likes the idea of being the precedent now for future plays like that. Now that the shift limitations are going to cause that, and it's like the potential lawyer in him comes out, and he's like, well, now it could be the Gallo rule or something like that. But Dan asked Gallo yesterday when we were talking to him, are you surprised this happen, and he said, what I'm not surprised about is that it was me as the hitter, because weird stuff happens to me for my whole career.
All time.
And I was like, yeah, that is the case. So overturned. He said, after the year I had last year, it's nice to look up and see 278 instead of 230
right.
Or whatever like that. But yeah, I do think it's going to be very interesting to see if this does establish precedent, because we're going to see that play more this season than we've probably seen it combined in the history of baseball, just because there was no reason to align your defense that way before 10 days ago or whatever. So yeah, I thought that was a weird little behind the scenes. There's a lot of cases where a player will be unhappy with the official score's decision and will sort of not confront, but will sort of push for it, sometimes even face to face with the scorer. Josh Donaldson had an issue with a play. Kenta a couple years ago thought there was a hit that should have been an error that would have taken 4 runs off his ERA and all that. But I feel like the whole team sort of uniting for a cause here it was an interesting component of it. Was like, let's get Joey Gallo a hit. Let's establish that this should always be a hit in these situations. And also, let's just get the satisfaction of actually winning an appeal against MLB, which is not the easiest thing to do, just in general. Because you can make the best case in the world, and they might just go, nah. It's not like it's an independent arbiter who's like looking at this stuff. So Joey Gallo, as he said, guy like me doesn't get that many hits. To get one on a day I wasn't even playing, that's pretty cool.
Well, and so often players, it's nice to get that hit early in the season.
Yes,
because that hit being added to your total in July doesn't change your batting average that much. Changing it here in April, can change the perception considerably.
When you're looking up there and the thing starts with a 1 or worse, a 0 on the batting average, I feel like that can weigh on you. Honestly,
I'll be very interested to see if when Gallo comes back from this, if he's coming back from this, whether it's when he gets to New York, and he gets to show up to New York with a 278 batting average.
Were you in their pregame yesterday?
No, I got there just.
We asked him about that.
Yesterday.
This was kind of off the record. It was just chatty, but he said, because we were wondering, like, are they going to try to do like a formal media session with all the New York reporters, because they're all going to write about him coming back. Obviously, he's a talking point, and he was like, "Oh, you think they're going to want to do that?" And he, I thought, really had a mature response, at least to us when we were asking about it, and said, "Look, I'm going to get booed by 50,000 people there. I sucked in New York. It was terrible. I hated sucking. I wanted nothing more than be good in that circumstance, and I was the worst." And he said, "But how many people? It's a life experience. I'm going to go to New York. They're going to boo me. 50,000 people are going to call me names. Hopefully I'm playing and I hit a homer or we win or whatever. And either way, I'm going to come home from there and life is going to go on. And I'll be able to look back at that and be like, well, that's a unique," like he said, weird stuff happens to me. This is going to be a weird, him and Correa are going to get booed in New York, and it's going to be interesting to see who gets booed louder, I guess.
When the Yankees came to visit the Twins at Hammond Stadium, he would come up to bat and get booed.
Yeah.
And then Aaron Hicks would come up to bat and get booed. And I was like, I'm like, I just wish Josh Donaldson would have made this trip.
Yeah.
So both crowds could have booed him.
People are going to run out of voice. They're booing so much. I will just say, and we will finish on this, but talking to Joey Gallo yesterday was the longest I talked to him, just kind of informally about some stuff. But talking to him during spring a couple times, great guy, and I don't mean like he's a saint or anything. But what I mean is like very good sense of humor, very good awareness of the things as a player that people criticize him for, very good kind of self-awareness of, they're going to boo me in New York. I sucked there. You know what I mean? There are some players you go like, you talk to them and they seem so unaware of how people perceive them, and I find it so much better when you don't have to tiptoe around a guy. And I even said to him like stuff about strikeouts where normally I would try to word it differently because I'd be afraid he'd go, "What do you mean I strike out a lot?" And he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'd be like, if I hit 180, I'll be." And I just thought, okay, this is a guy who, it in a weird way makes me more confident that there is a bounce back in him, because he's not in denial about the problems or the effect of the problems or how people perceive the problems. And I feel like that's, I don't know, a little bit more there's a little bit more space for him to have it click again when in his mind. Now, he could be an overthinker, and if you're getting booed and all that stuff, but I don't know.
That can take a toll on your confidence.
So far,
there is something to be said for being obliviously confident.
Yes, absolutely. But so far, I mean, he's been good for the Twins. Obviously, he needs to come back from this injury sooner than later, but I don't know. I think if he can get on a roll for the Twins, I think he's going to be a very impactful, fun-to-watch player on the field. But I think if things are going well for him, sustained going well for him, I think the personality that will come through could make him a pretty quick fan favorite in sort of the opposite way it was in New York, where people really wanted to embrace him, and he hit 160 and he made it impossible. Okay, I have to shut up.
You have to go.
I've missed the clubhouse start.
I will be cleaning up this stuff for you. Okay. Thank you to our sponsors, Forgotten Star. Get there and enjoy beer in the sunshine. Native, take care of your skin. That's the promo code Geek. Raycon, also the promo code Geek. Stamps.com. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Native is the promo code Gleeman. Raycon is also the promo code Gleeman.
John, here's
Stamps
a better
is Geek
way.
And Gleeman 20 for
Go back and listen.
for the
we'll be back
Sunday.
Wednesday
with a mailbag.
Yeah, we haven't done a mailbag for a while.
And then Friday we'll be doing another free episode.
Yeah.
So 2 free episodes this week, 1 Patreon, and then we will be back to sort of our Fridays for free podcasts, and Monday and Wednesday with Patreon. So you want to get
Wednesday. It's going to be real early in the morning. It's a noon game.
Okay. Yeah, we got to talk about that then.
If you want to listen to our midweek episodes, go to Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We'll do usually 1 or 2 midweek episodes, mailbags, guests, breakdowns of actual games and series, and any news that pops up. We would love to have you join us in our little private club for Twins Talk, patreon.com/Gleeman. And if you have zero interest in joining that, we will